Every leader's journey is shaped by a handful of defining decisions, those moments of risk, doubt and conviction that influence their lives and careers. In this podcast, we get to hear the stories behind those choices. Welcome to Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. In this episode, I speak to the CEO of Pinterest, Bill Ready.
We can get sort of trapped in the constructs of what we think is possible. I actually think for all of us, so much more is possible than what we imagine.
Bill grew up in a small town in Kentucky, working in his parents' auto repair shop. His early goals were simple: become the first in his family to go to college, get a stable job, and have health insurance. But he went on to exceed those expectations and move from the shop floor to Harvard Business School, Silicon Valley, and eventually the C-suite.
The further I've gotten into my career, the more I look back and say, a lot of the best lessons actually came from that little town in Kentucky, that little auto repair shop.
As CEO of Pinterest, Bill faced his toughest decision yet, making the platform private for users under 16. It was controversial, but it was guided by a strong sense of accountability.
Users become sort of nameless and faceless. But for me, I see every single one of them staring back at me.
These are Bill Ready's Executive Decisions. You have an amazing CV. I can't work out what you evolved to and from. VC, working for the big corporations, working for small corporations, being a CEO, setting your own companies up. How would you describe yourself?
I did 5 startups, so I would still consider myself primarily an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Although I was an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't grew up in a little town in Kentucky, and my aspirations were, as the first of my family, go to college, and my aspirations were, get a stable job and have health insurance for the family. Didn't have health insurance growing up. Grew up in a place where I needed government assistance to get to college and things like that. So get to college, graduate, get a stable job, actually have health care for the family. Those were the goals. But then have ended up having the good fortune to have built multiple of those to billions of dollars in revenue. And so I've ended up running larger companies as a result of that. But in my heart, I'm an entrepreneur and a builder.
Let's go right back to Kentucky. I know you worked for the family business, the garage, and you worked really hard from a young age. Tell me about the key influences and the people you drew inspiration from when you were very young.
So my parents are small business owners, little auto repair shop in a small town in Kentucky. And so, I grew up working there, and, later on in life, I'd get to, Harvard Business School and McKinsey and Silicon Valley and all those places. The further I've gotten into my career, the more I look back and say, a lot of the best lessons actually came from that little town in Kentucky, that little auto repair shop, of just, what it means to take care of customers, what it means to do the right thing by people, what it means to have a long-term relationship with your customers. And, and so those were instilled pretty early on. I always say I started working at a repair shop when I was 13, but that was when I started working on cars. Before that, I'd paint the building and, repave the asphalt. And, so I started like 7 or 8 years old. So hard work was a must from the beginning.
Did you enjoy the hard work?
Not then. So again, these are things like the more time goes by, the more I appreciate how valuable these things were. At the time I was like, oh, my friends are getting to do all these other things and I'm here working. Drive by while I'm out there, working and sort of wave and think, oh, wow, I wish I was doing that. And I look back now like, oh no, those were like really important lessons. So
there's no way you could have been as successful as you've been in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, and these extraordinary companies you've worked with, for, and created, if you didn't have a strong work ethic as well. Has that been instilled in you that actually a job isn't just 9 to 5?
I think that's right. I mean, I would say, for my family, a lot of it was just necessity. But I think the work ethic was definitely there. Military family. My dad woke me up to the Navy Reveille every morning for 18 years, just about. So there are definitely things like that. That little town in Kentucky was just outside of Fort Knox. So grew up outside of a military base. And so a lot of those things, sort of in terms of discipline and work ethic, sort of rubbed off in that. But a lot of it was, hard work out of necessity, just because it was, I always talk about, the link to doing good things for customers is sort of, instilled at an early age, because we literally, if we took good care of customers and business was good, then we ate well. If things weren't going great with customers, then it was, we go to the grocery store on the other side of the town where, the meat was only expired by a few days and, probably wouldn't make you sick. So that linkage of like, hey, take care of customers and good things happen for you, was sort of there from early on, but it was out of necessity. But I actually think, as an entrepreneur, one of the things, back to like lessons I didn't realize were such powerful lessons then, necessity is the mother of invention. I'm a huge believer in the theory of constraints, like Silicon Valley. So much of Silicon Valley, people talk about tech titans and things now. The story of Silicon Valley is not one of titans. The story of Silicon Valley is one of, an upstart with, no resources, but, a lot of imagination, a lot of hard work, and a lot of ingenuity can go take on massive incumbents. Yeah. That's how Silicon Valley was born.
Tell me about taking responsibility as well of your mistakes.
So I was 13 and had just started, actually working on cars in the shop. And I had messed up on a farmer's truck. And
what did you do?
I actually don't. It was a careless mistake. It's sort of actually less the mistake itself, but more that we were going to need to keep it for an extra day for me to sort of redo the work that I had done. And I'm sort of expecting my parents to go explain to him what I'd done. And I said, no, you go tell him what you did and what you're going to do to make it right. 13. And as I tell the story, people oftentimes imagine it's going to be like a Norman Rockwell painting or something where like the farmer's, oh son, it's all right, don't worry. No, he needed that truck for his livelihood. Like that was, it was a place where like most people were living paycheck to paycheck, and he needed that for his livelihood, and he let me know it. And so even I've told that story a few times. Even telling it now, like every time I tell it, like I feel the lump in my throat of like what it felt like at 13 to stand there like knees knocking and having to look somebody in the eye and explain to them, the mistake I made and what I was going to do to make it right. And back to like the powerful lessons from early on. I think one of the things that has happened in tech is that, there's so many people running platforms with hundreds of millions or billions of users. And I've had the good fortune to work on products that, that have served billions of users. But I think, for so many people that are working on these products, they don't have to sort of look eye to eye, with all the customers. Yeah. And with hundreds of millions or billions of users become sort of nameless and faceless. But for me, I see every single one of them staring back at me, and I have that same. Really? When we make decisions about what we're going to do, like, that's sort of my bar is, could I look someone in the eye and say, I did my level best to do what in my heart of hearts I felt was the right thing.
Bill, that's going to come up later in your story when we talk about Gen Z as well and your extraordinary actions. And I want to come to that. You grew up in, for want of a better word, a really tough rural environment where it was really tough for the customers. It was tough for your family, paycheck to paycheck, customer to customer. You got to the University of Louisville. Tell me about that. The first one in your family.
Yeah, it was, that was sort of the dream, was just to get to college. And
was it a dream?
Absolutely.
Of you or your parents or both?
I'd say my parents always wanted me to do well. They didn't know what was possible in that. And so they wanted me to do well in school, things like that. But I think certainly for my dad, like his dream was, two things my dad will reliably say to me when I see him. The first, when he shakes my hand, I can see you're still not working for a living. Not enough calluses. And then the second is only half. He's proud, but only half joking. He'll say, "You could have been a damn fine mechanic," which is, and the business is still here waiting for you. So, but it's great grounding, for those things. But back to University of Louisville. Just getting to college was a dream. The day I stepped foot on campus, I felt like I had made it. And
did you feel part of it, or did you kind of think, "Wow, should I be here"?
You definitely have those feelings. University of Louisville, it's funny. Then that was the big city. So University of Louisville, Louisville's a mid-sized city in the U.S., but from where I grew up, it was like, oh my gosh, like they had one-way streets and parallel parking and, all these things were just like very different from where I grew up. And so that was a big dream at that time.
Big dream and big decision. And this is called executive decisions. And most of our conversation will focus on your business decisions. But in many ways, it's kind of the biggest decision you ever made in your life, not to work with your father, not to become a mechanic, not to have calluses on your hands, a huge decision to become the first person in your family to go to university.
This is one of the things I think a lot about is that I think, and it's actually not that unique amongst entrepreneurs. You look at Silicon Valley, like why does Silicon Valley skew significantly towards immigrants? Yeah. So many people that had to take a leap to go take a chance and willing to, sort of take that leap without knowing what was on the other side. But I think when I talk to people that have done that, and they have, sort of traveled a long journey to get to where they are, yes, there's a lot of hard work in that. There had to be some aptitude in that. but they're also, not just some good fortune. Who are the people along the way that were the nudges in the right direction? And so, I think about, who are the teachers along the way that, said, hey, you could do this.
Your mother bought you these encyclopedias.
Yeah, and she had to work overtime to do it. And so, she wasn't pressuring me to go to college or, these things. She just, wanted me to do the best I could do. And I remember, she had to work overtime for me to be able to get those. And so I remember cover to cover, read them all as a kid.
Yeah.
If I could go back and talk to the younger me, I'd say, dream bigger. Dream bigger. And people say, hey, Bill, haven't, from small town in Kentucky, haven't things worked? It's like, well, I just didn't know how big to dream. And sort of for me, it was sort of each stage along the way, run the hardest I could to the furthest horizon I could see. And then you get to that, and then, there's a next horizon, and you run hard for that, and there's a next horizon. But, that's, if I could go back, I'd say dream bigger.
What would that have changed?
I don't know if here's the thing. I wouldn't change anything, because I think it was all part of what was necessary along the way. The sort of, the deeper I get in my career, the older I get, the more I see these were all foundational things. It all happened as it should have. And even the things I thought were really hard in the moment these were learning moments. These were, character building moments. But, I think for all of us, we get, we can get sort of trapped in the constructs of what we think is possible. I actually think for all of us, so much more is possible than what we imagine.
Tell me about some of those academic mentors. Was there someone who said, Bill, you can do this. You're not that country mouse. Actually, you are really smart and you've got a great future.
There were multiple along the way, more than I can name. I remember one of my professors in the computer science department. He actually taught Harvard Business School case studies.
Okay.
And, he said, hey, Bill, I love that you, came here to the University of Louisville, you could be there. And so that was sort of what prompted the leap to go to Harvard Business School, as well as the first two startups. I was the first engineer, and, one was as a .com IPO, but then there's also a .com crash and burn. And the second one's sort of the same way. And the lesson I learned from that is that, the products were good. The software for both of those actually still runs today, 20 plus years later. But the business model didn't work. So I was like, I've got to figure out the business model side too. And so I wanted to do that. But, I had actually multiple professors in the computer science department like, hey, Bill, you could go do that. But I remember specifically there was one of them that he taught Harvard Business School case studies. And he's like, Bill, you could do that.
Rural Kentucky, working in your parents' auto shop to Harvard Business School. Wow.
Yeah, that was, might as well have been like going to the moon.
Yeah. I can see that.
Like I said, never had even met somebody that went to an Ivy League school. So, but again, this is where, if you're honest with yourself, who are the people along the way that gave the encouragement, right? I didn't even imagine that was possible for somebody like me from a place where I came from. And so you had those people that encouraged along the way.
I'm hearing only positivity and mentors and encouraging people. But there are people who just said, you are that country mouse. Were there people trying to put you down? And did that drive you?
Sure, yeah. I don't talk about those as much because I like to focus on the positive. It's interesting. My wife and I both had similar experiences on this. We went to the same high school, and went to the same university. But we had similar experiences in elementary school. And mine was I was from the wrong side of the railroad tracks. Her, she had started school in Korea and then came to the U.S. But same experience, which was, first grade, they sort of separate you up into reading groups. And there's sort of low, medium, high. And, I got put in the low group. And I remember saying to the teacher, hey, I can read those books. Yeah. And no, you're over here. And I think a lot of it was just I was coming to school in clothes that other people had donated and, things like that. And so it was, off of, the sort of assumption of sort of, you're from the wrong side of the railroad tracks, you're over here in this group. And it wasn't until third grade was the first standardized test. And so there's been lots of criticism of standardized tests, things like that. And there's always room to improve these things. But I would say standardized testing, was one of those things that, probably changed my trajectory because, after being consistently in the lowest reading group, I finally got a chance to prove I can read those books. And so took the first standardized test in third grade and then went from that to we're going to bus you to the other side of the county to a different school. Only for a couple of days a week because, it's small town Kentucky. So, the resources are limited. But like, that's a first early example of like, oh, there's maybe a different thing is possible.
Let me ask you a question. Are you driven more by the positive energy you get from people, or by those examples when people have been negative about you and you want to prove them wrong?
Honestly, it's both.
Yeah.
And I would say, so those examples, early on, I'd say there were more people telling me what I'd never be than what I could be. Just by number of people, that would have been true.
That's about them, not about you, by the
way.
Yeah.
But sort of, and at the same time, if I hadn't had some of the examples of like, well, who is the one teacher that said you can?
Yeah.
And so like, on the one hand, I could say like, yeah, that was sort of fuel in the tank to say, well, no, I'm going to go prove something different. But also, if there hadn't been just the one that said, no, you can, I don't know, maybe you believe all that. And so, but both are true. And when I look back now, I think there's so much more to be had from positive energy than from negative energy. But like, I would say, yeah, that was part of the fuel in the tank.
How are you about handing out a decision you have to make with an underperforming employee, but you wouldn't have employed them if you didn't think they were good in the first place? Negative, positive, how do you cope it? That decision comes up all the time with someone in your position.
Yeah, I think as a leader, you've got to be able to balance both. I think at any moment in time, there are things going well and things that are not going well or things that are going poorly. And you got to be able to look at both of those equally. And you got to look at what's not going well, to say, okay, here's what we need to do differently. But you've also got to look at what is going well to say, well, why is that going well? And how do we do more of that? And I actually think it's just about a balance between those. Because, if you're overly focused on just what's going well, then you'll be, overly optimistic and get blindsided by things that could go wrong. But, if all you look at is what's not going well, then you're going to miss the things that could be really great. I had a professor in business school who would talk about this, that so much of how a lot of traditional feedback works, particularly in like sort of US business culture, is, you get your performance review and it's like, well, here's all the things you need to work on more.
Yeah.
And, he had done a lot of research that said, well, hey, all of us, have different attributes, different characteristics, and there's so much more value to be had by looking at what you are doing well and saying, of those things you're doing well, how could you be great at those things? Yeah, and some of the things you're not doing well, be aware of those. Don't have a blind side, but you may have way more yield from investing in the things where you could be exceptional than saying the things that you're just, mediocre at. I was never going to play center on the basketball team, no matter how much you coached me up. Like, I wasn't going to be center on the basketball team.
Things
I wasn't going to be a singer.
Bill, yeah?
Those were not my gifts. And so you could coach me all you wanted. You could give me all the performance feedback you wanted as to like how to be a better center on the basketball team. Those were not my gifts. Yeah. But, okay, I could be a better mathlete than athlete.
What are you great at? What were you good at that you are great at?
I'll expose one of my own development opportunities. Like, I don't like to talk about myself that much. And actually,
welcome to Executive Decisions, Bill. This is the podcast where you talk about yourself.
Yeah. But I actually think that great leaders tend to give away all the credit and assume if something goes wrong, they assume the blame, and if something goes right, they give away the credit. But what I'd say has worked really well for me is having a bold ambition. And a bold ambition that, that gets really great people excited, and then really empowering great people to go do their best work. And if I go look back at the 5 startups, if I go look back at sort of the best successes, it was far less about me and more about who did we get around the table. And, if you get great people working on something they deeply care about and really empower them, like, it's amazing what is possible.
And this came up with a podcast we recorded very recently as well. You get to a certain point with people, with good people, it's not about money. It's about other things.
That's right. An early mentor asked me a really great rhetorical question. He said, hey, Bill, with whom do you build your army? Do you want the conscripted? Do you want mercenaries? Or do you want freedom fighters? Yeah. And like just instinctively, I was like, well, freedom fighters, of course. And he's like, well, Bill, like, you're going to realize like that's actually not what a lot of people choose, because like freedom fighters, harder to manage. They'll call you on your bullshit in a second if you're not real and you're not authentic. But if you're authentic, they'll give you more than anybody else.
What's your worst quality as a leader?
Well, maybe just expose it, like not talking enough about myself. We're all constantly developing. And I'd say this is, one that I've worked on a bunch is that, I think there's also a lot of value in like sharing your own vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And I think for many leaders, that's a hard thing to do. Taking on big challenges, leading people through tough circumstances, can feel like, hey, you should always have the answers, and it's hard to be vulnerable. But I've actually had some great lessons in that. In those moments when you do that, those actually can be great for the team too. They understand how they can support you. Because at the end of the day, if you've got the right people around you, you're all helping to make each other better.
I'll give you a brief anecdote. One of my first big interviews about 15 years ago was a really tough big CEO, and he'd just lost his CEO in a terrible accident in Russia. And his team didn't know him. They just know him as the hard guy, the enforcer. And we did this interview, and he got quite emotional about his former mentor, his former boss. And his entire team saw that. And they thought, oh my God, this guy is not only the tough leader we thought he was, he's also a really great human being who really cares. That vulnerability really mattered to his team.
Yeah. I'll give a tangible example of this. For me is shortly after we had sold Venmo and Braintree to PayPal, which is a big transition moment. But at that same moment, my wife and I were expecting our first child. And it's a clarifying moment of like, I always loved, building things, but also like, oh, that's a moment where you say, like, hey, what really matters? But 2 years before that, we had launched in 40 new countries. We were sort of building two startups simultaneously between Venmo and Braintree. And, I was living on a plane, working nonstop. And so I set boundaries to make sure, I could, do the things I needed to do to be a good husband and a good father. And, I remember 8 or 9 months into it, it was just, I was just constantly feeling like I'm failing my team because I couldn't give them the 18-hour days I was giving them before. And so for 8 or 9 months, I was sort of carrying that and sleeping less and less because it's like, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm there for, for the moments I need to be, on the family side. But then I didn't want to let my team down. And then finally I had this moment where I was just like, it sort of broke down with my team. I was like, I know I'm failing all of you. I know I'm failing. And like, here's why. Like, because I want to be a good dad. I want to be, a good husband. And I can't handle all these things at the same time. And I know I'm failing you. And they're like, Bill, this is way better, because as I had less time to be in all those things, it had given them more room.
It gave them autonomy. It gave them
that's right.
ownership of their tasks rather than you managing every second of their task.
And it was forcing me to prioritize more about what really mattered most. And
you learn a lot about balance in your life.
That's right. But that was a great moment of where like that vulnerability, which, sure, it took me 8 or 9 months to have that conversation to say, I think I'm failing you. But then by having that conversation, it gave them the opportunity to say like, Bill, this is a better version of you.
You've got a really big career, and I hate to do this, but I want to get to Pinterest. But so in the meantime, Venmo, Braintree, pre-Google, COO, PayPal, Google, 2020, 2022. Give me the best decision during that whole period.
If I say best decision of my career, I think it's also the toughest. So toughest decision of my career, at Pinterest, we were the first and still the only platform to do private only for under 16. Yeah. And it was a really tough decision because, it was shortly after I came in as CEO. And to sort of give context, when I came in as CEO 3.5 years ago, Pinterest was declining in users. Attrition was way up. Stock price was down 80+%. The narrative on Pinterest was that Pinterest was sort of aging up and aging out and had missed the next generation. And a few months after I came in, we made a decision to do private only for under 16. And people thought it was like, oh, well, you're struggling to get the next generation of users. Now you're definitely not getting the next generation of users. And, I made that decision, through two lenses. One, as a dad, I looked at what was happening and just very clearly, I could see that it's not safe for, kids to be contacted by strangers online. By the way, say that out loud and like, doesn't that just make sense? It's not safe for kids to be contacted by strangers online. Of course it's not safe, but somehow we've all come to accept that. So that was sort of through the lens of a parent and through the lens of that kid in Kentucky that's got to look back at all the customers and say, hey, did I really do my level best to do right by you? The other lens was taking a bet that there would be real demand for safer spaces, and that maybe that would be a path to win with young users. But it was a huge leap. Nobody done it before, completely unproven. And so that was a really tough decision. Fast forward, you asked about the best decision. I would say it's been the best decision, both in that, for us as a platform, it's now the case that, we haven't reported this most recent quarter, but as of the last quarter that we reported, 9 straight quarters of record high users, more than half the platform is Gen Z now. And if you ask them, one of the top reasons that they will give is they see Pinterest as a safe space away from the toxicity they experience elsewhere online. So it's been core to how we won with young users. But broader than that even, I always talk about, like, we want to set an example. My goal in coming to Pinterest was to prove that you could tune AI for positivity, to prove that there could be a more positive business model for social media. And, nearly 3 years later, you now have real momentum in, Australia just did a ban on social media for under 15.
UK having a look at it.
UK is having a look at it. Last summer, when I was in France, I met with the Macron administration where they're considering it and actually have voiced public support for these things, and actually said, like, not only is this something that I think this industry needs accountability, but we actually, through that decision that was both the toughest and later the best, not just the best for our business, but actually proved it was possible. That you could make a decision like this and the world didn't end, and it could actually be good for business. And, back to those early lessons, it shouldn't be that exceptional to invest in the long-term well-being of your customers and your users.
I'm just going to recap. Gen Zers born 1997 to 2012, the first true digital natives. You made this decision in 2023. It was a controversial decision to turn off the social features for under 16s. It caused a 26% drop in your share price as well. Wall Street predicted it would kill the platform.
Yep.
This is an extraordinary leadership example. You were contrarian. You were told it was going to fail. This oasis from toxicity was going to kill your young fan base, user base, what have you. Brave decision. Did you feel how did it feel when you did that at the time? Because you were lambasted.
Knees knocking, lump in my throat. But, I've found this, like, time and time again, across each of the businesses. What I've tended to find is that, a lot of the best decisions were that, the thing that was going to kill the business was going to kill the business before it saved the business. And I've seen that multiple times. Putting a social feed in a payments app, with Venmo was very contrarian at the time. It actually ended up being a defining feature of the app. And by the way, also why, a decade later, having seen some of the negative externalities that happen with social media, like, I felt some responsibility to, like, prove a better business model for social media. The most high consequence decisions, are oftentimes the best opportunity for impact. There's others have said this. It's not my line, but Formula One's exploded. They'll talk about races are not won in the straightaways. Races are won in the turns. So these sort of pivotal moments, you win in the turns. And in those turns, oftentimes it's not going with the pack. It's saying, like, okay, what's a different way to do this that's going to feel way less comfortable, but potentially has way more potential for impact.
It's proved in the customer numbers. I think Gen Z is 40% of your user base now. I think last I saw, you had like 570 million active users as well. Do you think that decision, which was incredibly brave a couple of years ago now as well, can act as a catalyst? Because I've got teenage kids as well. I see not so much the damage, but I see the infatuation and the obsession and the continuation of this scrolling and going through social media the whole time. I hate seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we've continued to build on these successes where, yes, we've supported phone-free schools, and we don't just sort of advocate for thoughtful, regulation on these things. We walk the walk. So, if we see a school-age user opens our app during school hours, we'll give them a prompt that says, we love you. But that also means we care about your education. Come back and see us after school. And as we do these things, it's showing our users we care about them and that we're actually investing in their well-being. And I think, again, it's short-term versus long-term. They come back more for these things. But to your point of putting the genie back in the bottle, just because something seems intractable today doesn't mean that it really is. And so, one of the things I've said many times is that I'd love to wake up in a world where, social media companies, tech platforms, AI platforms are competing on their safety record the same way the auto manufacturers compete on theirs. And when I say that, people say, well, that seems extremely aspirational because, can you put the genie back in the bottle? Can you really turn these things back? It's not that long ago. You only have to go back a few decades to a time when many major auto manufacturers were saying that seatbelts were against the business model. You say that today, and that sounds absolutely insane. But two things happened. One thing was that, yes, you got some thoughtful regulation, and I'm a capitalist at heart, but even as a capitalist, there are examples of market failures where you need to make sure there's not a race to the bottom, things like that. So some thoughtful regulation happened that, yes, mandated safety belts, but also crash test ratings were created. And, so you had some thoughtful regulation, but then you had some really great free market solutions where, Volvo invents the 3-point safety belt, proves you can build a brand on safety, proves that consumers will make a buying decision on safety. And then also with crash test ratings, you have a common way to measure safety. And fast forward to today, not only, does every major auto manufacturer compete on their safety record, the regulation doesn't have to dictate every sensor and airbag in the car. You could regulate the outcomes.
Yeah.
And actually have the regulation point the innovation in the right direction. And so that's the kind of world that, I'd hope to see, and why we are simultaneously, advocating for thoughtful regulation and trying to work with policymakers to help that happen, but also showing that there are free market solutions that can be part of this as well. And the two things can and should go hand in hand.
Look, you said yourself, you're a capitalist. You want to make money. You want Pinterest to make money, and it's proven good business. It's like I speak to a couple of the big renewable guys, or the guys who are trying to put renewable solutions into data centers, whatever. It's like, they're saying, we're crushing it. We're cleaning up. We're making loads of money. You don't have to say that we're green as almost a slur. We're green and we're making loads of money.
That's right.
And that's the point you're making as well. Are you an evangelist about this? Because you've made this decision. It works for Pinterest. It works for Pinterest shareholders. Can you not turn around, and I'm asking you the question now, to Mark, to Elon, to the owners of the other social media sites and say, look, there's a pathway here?
So we effectively have tried to sort of open source this. We created a thing called the Inspired Internet Pledge that called on the industry to, measure the emotional well-being impacts of time spent on your platform. Measure those, publish the results, commit to improving them, and then share the work as to what works. So as we've done these things, and we've actually had other platforms sign up for that. And so I think there is progress there. And for us, we committed to that. We continue to publish our work, share our findings. We are sharing the things that are, I said that this, safer space, more positive space is core to why we're winning with our users. We're not trying to hide that away and not tell anybody. We're sharing. Here's exactly what we did that worked.
Guys, this is bold and it works.
It works because we don't want to be the only ones. I actually hope others copy it. Consumers are making decisions on this. Advertisers want to make decisions on this. And so we don't want to be the only ones. The things that are happening with social media, things that are happening with AI, it affects all of us.
Yeah.
You can't fix it for just one person or a group of people. It's the definition of a collective action problem. And so if we only fix it for Pinterest, my daughter doesn't get to grow up in, a better world than what exists today.
We're also going to have to tell our kids what an encyclopedia is as well,
That's right.
That's a learning curve for them.
Yeah.
Look, I want to take you back. I didn't mean to jump over 20 years of your career earlier on, by the way. But what that proved is that you've had some amazing opportunities, whether you were a consultant, whether you were a VC, whether you're working for PayPal, Google. What are the big decisions you want to make next as well for yourself? I know you've made some amazing decisions at Pinterest, and you will continue to do so. But what about yourself? What are your goals? Because you said earlier on something absolutely pivotal. Dream big. Don't underplay it. Go for it as well.
Well, I think that what we're doing right now, if we can prove a more positive business model, not just for social media, but AI platforms are being built now, a lot of the attention economy that has formed and the negative externalities of that are creeping into new AI platforms, things like that. If we can prove there's a better alternative to that, I think that may be the most consequential work of my lifetime.
Yeah.
If we can prove that that's possible, because one of the things that I think we may not fully appreciate is that we have the largest, most profitable business models in history that have at their core, things like engagement via enragement and sort of, targeting some of the worst aspects of human nature and sort of perpetuating those things and amplifying those things. And, we're at this moment where, as with any technology, AI can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It's really important that we make sure that it's being used for good. And we've seen, a lot of, what happened with social media. There was a time, if we were having this conversation 10 or 11 years ago, we'd have been talking about how social media was helping us know our neighbors better and helping us reconnect with long lost friends and helping democracies rise up. And there was a time when it was. And I was quite enamored with it at that time too, right? We put a social feed and a payments app, for goodness sake, right? And fast forward, and you've hit all these unintended consequences. But part of that was that AI got put in charge of what you see more than a decade ago, and it got asked to maximize your view time, and it figured out that you look longer at the things that trigger you, and started, pushing us into more and more polarized positions, because was the maximum view time to not only show you more people that believe the same things that you did, but also somebody that was different than you, showing you more of the extreme examples of that. We've got to fix this. It's a major societal problem. To be very clear, I don't think people are doing this intentionally. I think this is
sure? I worry about it.
Well, it's a good point. I think early on you could say these are unintended consequences. I think that these have become deeply ingrained in the business model. It is the maximal engagement function if you are trying to keep people looking at a screen as long as you can.
You talked earlier about taking that step back from those 18-hour days, and wow, you became a great husband and father, I'm sure, and a better boss from doing that as well. What do you do now to balance your life, to kind of balance your intense business interests, your extraordinary business interests? What do you do for yourself to kind of make sure your mental and physical health is top notch?
I don't have anything that's like super unique. I think I don't think I'm too different from many others. Like, I think the best moments for us as people are oftentimes when we get to help somebody else, invest in somebody else. So some of that is trying to sort of give back to, share with other entrepreneurs, try to be helpful there. My own family, doing story time with my daughter every night, making sure I'm there for the softball games, trying to do the things for her that, my parents did for me, of just, creating some of the right encourament. She'll figure out what her dreams are. But can I, contribute to helping her to dream big and, sort of pursue, the best her that she can be. Those are the things that sort of fill my cup. And then, you got to take care of your health and all those things. But even those things, I'm not one of these like, live forever kind of people. I don't know that it's important to make room for the next generation, those kinds of things. But I'd like to be
quite a populated planet.
But I'd like to be around for to walk her down the aisle and see my grandkids and. Whether she wants to start a first company or whatever, it's good to be clear about, the job you want later. I hope she'll want me as an advisor, and a board director when, on her board, whatever she chooses to do, can I make her personal board of directors? But you got to earn the job. So I'm making sure I'm working to earn the job today that I want in the future.
Bill, it's just been a fantastic conversation, from rural Kentucky to Silicon Valley to Davos, where we're filming this episode as well, to when you walk your daughter down the aisle in a few years' time. Thank you for sharing your executive decisions with CNBC.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Really enjoyed it.
Bill Reddy's journey from blue-collar, rural Kentucky to Harvard Business School to being a really successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur is a fascinating one, and one he is incredibly humble about. He never forgot his roots. But it was his massive decision when he became the CEO of Pinterest to limit the social functions for Gen Z that at the time people thought was a terrible decision for the company, would lead to a decline in profits, a decline in revenues, but actually it proved inspirational, impactful, and a brilliant decision from a profit point of view as well. It is an extreme example of a great executive decision. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Executive Decisions. I would love to hear your feedback. Drop your thoughts in the comments or a review, and please hit that follow or subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next episode of the podcast dropping on Tuesday, where I speak to the CEO of Philips, Lloyd Jacobs.
What's your view in the next 3-5 years? And you better take some time to think that through, because that will shape decisions that you will take with longer term implications. But then in the moment, we need to be extremely decisive.